Kyle Stevens with Stantec, and what I'll be doing tonight is taking about 15 minutes here to go through the results of the stormwater rate study that we conducted for the city of Fort Lauderdale. So jumping into it, there's a couple of key elements of the study that I'll cover this evening, and really it's best to think about this as a series of interconnected investigations. So we'll go through the revenue requirements, which are simply the amount of money that we need each year to run the stormwater system. And when we say stormwater, we're really talking about the precipitation that the city handles, or tidal inundation is another force that's common that the city has to manage. Next, we'll talk about the cost allocation, how we're going to determine how different parcels benefit from that stormwater service that the city is providing. And then finally, the fee structure and impacts to customers. And then the fourth one will just be the method of collection. Currently, the city does have a fee in place for stormwater. It is on the monthly utility bill with water, sewer, solid waste. As part of a recommendation, we're looking to move to a tax bill for next year. So jumping right into things, with regards to the revenue requirement, there's some near-term needs that we need to know about. So the current fee that's in place covers the operations and maintenance of the utility on an annual basis. That's about $11.5 million. In addition, currently there's about $4 million of cash-funded capital, and this is mainly renewal and replacement type items that the city is investing in. The additional need that we have that was included in the study was out of the Phase 1 master plan, which has a number of identified areas within the city. I've listed them here on this slide that are critical areas that need generational investments in stormwater to bring the level of service to where the city desires it. That is currently unfunded. That amount for the first phase is about $200 million. And so the goal of the revenue sufficiency analysis is to take all of the key financial information, including the three I just went over, and ensure that this utility has a sustainable amount of revenue to meet those needs over a 10-year period. And the way that we look over that is using a financial model to project for the next 10 years. And so this dashboard on the screen currently shows a 10-year outlook for the stormwater utility. And in this particular scenario, I've assumed a 0% rate increase going in fiscal year 2021 forward to look at that diagnostic scenario. So if we just put the cost in, could the fund afford it? And what we see is this works very much like your own personal bank account. We've got in orange here is the cash coming out of the fund, which is the operations and maintenance, as well as the capital investments that are shown down here. And we've got $200 million between 2020 and 21. And an additional $200 million in 2026 to be funded. And what this would show is without any rate increases, we would have a gap that would develop over time. And if we were to pay that gap, what we would do is use up the available fund balance in the checking account. It actually would go negative, even though that can't happen on this chart. And so what would it require to fix that? The solution to that is a rate increase of 54% in fiscal year 21. And what that would allow is for the stormwater utility to have enough revenue to float a bond that would cover the capital investments for $200 million in 2020 and 2021. And then out in the out years, we've got some small inflationary increases, potentially a rate increase in the future if there was another bond to be issued in 2026. And with those level of rate increases, you can now see the two lines in the middle, that cash out in orange, the cash out in black, are in sync with one another over the time period. And so what we're trying to do is align those two so that cash in and cash out are matching. That is the hallmark of a sustainable solution going forward. Now, what we'll do is use this revenue requirement in 2021 for the next part of the analysis, which is the cost allocation. Within the cost allocation, there's a number of ways that stormwater utilities in Florida and around the country charge for stormwater services. And so in the most basic format, some don't have a stormwater utility. They actually use taxable value, ad valorem values to pay for stormwater services. I would argue that's not a very good nexus between the value of a property and its potential to generate stormwater, or the stormwater the city has to handle. As you go down on these different elements on the left of measurement or characteristics of a parcel, we get closer and closer to items like gross area, pervious area, impervious area that are more aligned with the potential benefit that a parcel receives from stormwater or its ability to generate stormwater. So impervious area has been the one that's most commonly used in the industry because the harder surfaces don't absorb water, it runs off of the property. In Fort Lauderdale's case, as we went through the analysis, another metric was brought into the conversation, and it was trip generation rates. And the reason for that was because when we talked to the city and the folks in the stormwater department that run the system, there is a heck of a lot of work going on in the streets. And that's where a lot of effort is going in, and a lot of the benefits of having a functioning, sustainable stormwater system are derived from free and passable streets. During precipitation events, or in some of these pictures off to the right, inundation from seawater as well. That's another threat that we face in Southeast Florida. What are trip generation rates? And just simply put in this graphic articulates that it is a way for us to understand how parcels benefit from those free and passable streets that stormwater provides. And what it shows here is a single family home on average generates about 9.44 trips. But if we look at other different land uses like the convenience store, that generates about 845 trips per 1,000 square feet, or a supermarket, it creates roughly 106 trips per 1,000 square feet. Now, these aren't meant to be exact to the parcel. What they're really meant to do is broadly help us understand the benefit that large categories of different land uses benefit from the street. And it gives us an ability to, in our fees, recover the revenue proportional to the benefit received. Now, as we presented to commission, this study finalized with is actually a hybrid approach. And so what we've worked through is basically using the city's current structure for a portion of the required money each year we need to run the system. And then in addition, adding next year a trip generation component in that recognizes some of those findings that I talked about a second ago, where there's really a lot of benefit being derived in keeping the street free, clear, and passable to parcels within the city of Fort Lauderdale. How we split that revenue requirement, or the money we needed between the two elements, we conducted a cost of service analysis that looked at the two fundamental service delivery models for stormwater. On one side of the equation, the city is tasked with dealing with the quantity of stormwater, the physical gallons, and ensuring that we're receiving those from parcels and then delivering them to the receiving body, mostly the intercoastal waterway, the ocean finally. And then the second component is quality. And quality is a key function of stormwater. We deal with street sweeping, debris removal when it gets into the system. And so it's another part of the stormwater system. We did a cost allocation in order to look at the entire budget on a line item by line item basis in order to understand how much of the annual expenditures are spent between these two core activities. And it's roughly 20% on quality and 80% on the quantity. And so that metric became then the yardstick by which we set the revenue requirement in the fee to be recovered. So the fees that I will show you in a second, 20%, the amount of money we need on an annual basis is allocated to the trips that parcels generate. 80% is on the current structure based on impervious area, which is now tied to the quantity of stormwater activities related to quantity. So how does this fee structure work? For each individual parcel, the entire amount we need in FY21 is about $31.3 million. That's the amount of the assessment. We've spent 80% of it over to the current structure, which is at the end of the day based on impervious area. There are three customer categories. So there are single family homes. Those are assessed based on the number of dwelling units. And this is a current structure that's currently in place. It'll continue into 21. It's based on the number of dwelling units. If it is an improved property that's not a single family home, it is assessed on the gross acreage of the parcel. And then finally, there's a third category, which is for parcels that have not been improved yet. So vacant land that is in its undeveloped state. That has a separate charge that is on a per parcel basis. And off to the left here, I put the amounts that reflect the updated 2021 fees for each of these three customer classes. Now, if I go back over to the left and go down instead of over, on the trip structure side of the equation, there's about 6.2 million. That's the 20% we allocated to trips. That, converting it to a per unit, is about $4.19 per trip. And what I mean by that is we have categorized within Broward County's property appraiser data the land use that's been assigned to each property, and then tied that to the 10th generation ITE trip generation manual. This is the industry standard that identifies the different trip rates by land use classification. There's roughly 63 of those that we used in this particular analysis that allows us to differentiate how those properties benefit by their use of the street. And what that means is at the end of the day, off in the right-hand quadrant down here, is that each parcel will essentially have a unique bill based on its benefit derived from trips, but also based on the current structure, which is concerned with the amount of impervious area on a parcel. And I'll show you what this means when we talk about the customer impacts. And so the next few slides have some different customers that try to give us an idea of the impacts that we'd see on various customers. And so this is a single family home with one dwelling unit. The current fee is assessed, as I mentioned earlier, our billed currently on the utility bill. It's $14 a month in this current year that we're in. That is $168 annually. The updated fee would be $21.52 on a monthly basis. But as I mentioned in a second, I'll talk about it, the recommendation is to move it to the tax bill, which would mean it would be one bill on the tax in November for a parcel for the entire year. So that updated amount would be $258. The change from current to the updated for fiscal year 21 is $90.26. Now remember, as I talked about earlier, that first step, that revenue sufficiency, this reflects the fact that underlying in the system, it needs more revenue to be sustainable and make the kinds of investments that Fort Lauderdale needs in order to maintain the standards of stormwater services. How does that compare to other municipalities? So whenever we look at rates and impacts, we need to take stock of where we are. This particular slide, what we've done is surveyed a number of other communities in Florida that provide stormwater services. This is showing the average cost to a single family home. Shown here at $14 is Fort Lauderdale currently. The recommended rate for FY21 is shown off to the right in green at $21.52. And you can see that's on the right side of this quadrant. And whenever we're comparing, we never know the underlying details of these other communities. They, just like Fort Lauderdale, have different pressures and different levels of service. But some of the things that I see in the industry, as I go around, I'd like to make you aware of is oftentimes when we look on the right, you'll notice many of these communities are coastal communities. And in fact, coastal in the southwest quadrant of Florida, they face a very unique kind of stormwater management that typically comes at a higher cost. The other thing that I see is these fees over time have been moving in an upward direction. And so while this survey here shows Fort Lauderdale moving to fiscal year 21, I suspect if we were to update this next year when all of these other communities change their fees, a lot of these would move in the upward direction as well. And we've seen that over the last few years in order to manage many of the stormwater investments like Fort Lauderdale's seeing. With regards to other customer classes, this tile is concerned with looking at a condo example. For a condo example, it's a little bit different than a single family home. And so the way that condos will be assessed in fiscal year 21 is essentially there is a trip generation component that is assessed on a per dwelling unit basis. And then there's also a component based on the developed gross area, the gross area of the parcel that I mentioned a second ago. And what we do is we look at the entirety of the complex, create a fee for that entire, and then divide it up by the units based on their living area, their effective area. And so what the impact I'm showing here currently, this is just an example. Each condo will be a little bit different because each one has a little bit of a different footprint. The parcels are all a little bit different size. I'm trying to pick one here that's kind of a middle range one between a high rise and a mid rise. And what we see here is the current fee on a per unit basis is about $355 per unit. On an updated basis, it's about $631. That changes about $267 from the current fee to the proposed. If I take another example, here's an institutional example, a church here, about a 20,000 square foot building. This has a unique trip generation rate associated with it, as I mentioned again, as well as a component for impervious area based on the gross area of the parcel. So what that looks like currently, this bill is about $119.06. The update is $210.53. That's about a $91.46 if you look at it on a monthly basis. On an annual basis, it's about $1,097 in change. And at the bottom, I've put down here, this is just the breakdown for the individual between trip generation and current structure. You'll notice on each of these that will change slightly depending on the exact benefit criteria for that parcel. And so when I go to the next example, which is an example of a supermarket, as I mentioned earlier, this can generate a lot of trips, gets a lot of benefit from the free and passable streets. And so this bill looks a little bit different. It has a higher amount of trip-generated units compared to the impervious units. And so what this looks like is, on a monthly basis, the bill currently is about $267.36. The updated, based on the new methodology, is about $1,882 for a change of $1,600 in total. Method of billing will be the final thing I'll talk about. What we did is we compared the utility billing method, which is shown on the left side of your screen, which is how the city currently collects stormwater revenue, and the monthly bill for water and sewer, versus another alternative, which is the ad valorem assessment. And ultimately, it was recommended to go with the ad valorem assessment. There's several benefits that are really key, and a couple of them that came up in the study was accuracy. This allows us to map perfectly to parcels within the service area, as opposed to utility billing, which can be more complicated to get utility billing mapped to many parcels in certain cases. The recommendation to move to the non-ad valorem assessment, this will show up in the tax bill, would result in mid-October of a phase-out of utility billing for stormwater and a transition to the tax bill that would be issued in November of this year. That would cover the revenue requirements for the entirety of next fiscal year for the stormwater utility. And then finally, just a comparable survey of municipalities around the state, collected on here a number of the large stormwater utilities and how they charge stormwater fees. And what we're seeing in the industry is a movement toward the non-ad valorem assessment, which is shown in the orange triangle here. The green circles are utility billing municipalities. And so we're seeing over the years a movement for communities to recognize some of the benefits associated with charging a non-ad valorem assessment. One additional element as part of the study, in order to allow full transparency of the fees, given the structure we just talked about, we have set up, and the city has posted on their website, a portal which allows any property owner to go look at their property and get the exact information with regards to the customer class, the amount of gross area, trip generation, and the annual assessment that is being proposed to be assessed in fiscal year 21, which would be November of this year. I've included at the bottom here a link to this particular viewer, which has all of the parcels within the city of Fort Lauderdale on it. So with that, Jason, I'll conclude the formal remarks and then open it up to any questions or discussion.
Perfect. Thank you, Kyle. So we'll go ahead and we'll jump right into the first question here. So the first question comes from Javier. It says it is understandable to take precautions due to sea level rising, but where has our tax money gone these past years? I've been a resident of Fort Lauderdale for over 30 years, and recently it seems like we are competing with New York, Boston, Chicago, and other major high-rise cities. Why are the residents being penalized for the aging infrastructure? Why not stop or control the major developments around our city and neighborhoods? So Javier, I don't think we'll be able to answer or respond to that last portion of the question, but I'm going to hand it over to Verez to address the first two parts of that.
Hey, good evening. So I guess the answer, I work for the engineering department, so in reference to the sea level rise, you know, we have
Verez, we lost you there.
Jason, why don't we take the next question and we can come back to Verez?
That sounds good. All right, so the next question is from Brenda Flowers. And the question is, and I believe it's in regards to the single family slide, isn't increasing from 168 to 258 a 50% increase? I may have misread the slide.
No, that's correct. And so that goes back to the initial discussion that we had. And so we're changing the rate structure, but the first analysis that we conducted in this slide when I stopped it indicated that in FY21, in order to make the capital investments that the city needs, we need additionally about 54% more revenue. And so all of the rates that have been calculated in the back have that as a basic assumption that's built in. So almost all customers are experiencing an increase. in order to provide that revenue such that the city can make the investments it needs to. And that would support, I should mention, a bond in fiscal year 21. That's how the city's getting the money to make those investments.
Perfect. Thank you, Kyle. All right. Rares, do we have you back?
Rares dropped off. He's going to try to come back.
Okay, perfect. So we'll give him a few minutes. We have a few other questions here. The next question is...
Jason, Rares got kicked out of the system and he's going to sign back in. And so we'll get an opportunity to come back to question number 1 at that point.
Perfect, perfect. So the next question is, my proposed stormwater assessment is $258.24, which is $21.52 per month. Does this mean that my utility bill will be reduced by $21.52 per month? And I'll actually go ahead and answer that. The answer to that is your utility bill is going to be reduced by the amount you've been charged for the stormwater fee. So for single family homes this past year, that was $14, and that's how much we will see your your utility bill reduced. The next question is, why does Fort Lauderdale charge a stormwater fee? And I'm going to go ahead and hand that over to you, Kyle.
Yeah, absolutely. So the city, and many cities, I should say, charge stormwater fees. In fact, Florida has more stormwater utilities and fees than any other state in the union, and that might be expectable given our precipitation and our proximity to the coast. Additionally, cities like Fort Lauderdale are mandated by the Environmental Protection Agency to comply with federal regulations in providing stormwater services and the quality of stormwater. So a stormwater utility and fee is a mechanism by which the city has set up in order to address those needs systematically and plan for the long-term management of stormwater within the city.
Perfect, thank you. All right, and the next one is for you as well, Kyle. Did you get input from residents on the proposed new stormwater structure?
We did. So this study's actually been a long time coming. The initial work actually started in 2016 and has gone through the years up to this year where it's being implemented. And over that time, there's been a number of presentations and opportunities to get input, not only at the city commission level, but we've also had a number of meetings with condo owners, Civic Association of Fort Lauderdale, IT infrastructure task force. And so we've tried to really get this out in the community and get that feedback and try to incorporate it into the study over that time period.
Perfect, thank you, thank you. And then the next question comes from Edith Bynes. I don't understand why the fee structure is the same, I believe, for all single family homes. Why is that? I pay the same amount for a $100,000 property as someone who owns a $1 million property.
Yeah, so it's a great question. And the last part of that I'll take first, which was the comparison of the value. And so I should be really clear that this is not a tax. The stormwater assessment, the stormwater fee is not associated with property value. What we're really trying to determine is the amount of benefit that a property receives. And by the fee being very similar for single family homes, what the fee is expressing is that single family homes as a class derive very similar benefits from one another. They're usually set up from an impervious standpoint, very similar, have roofs, driveways, sidewalks, patios, things like that, that are very similar to one another. Some may be a little bit bigger, some may be a little bit smaller. The trip generation, though, is very similar across homes. And so what the fee has done is essentially assume that the benefit for single family home is very similar to one another.
Excellent. The next one is from Isaac. Is fiscal year 2022 going to the 54% increase of 2021 plus 3% for 2022 over my current charge, or will it only be 3% more than my current charge?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So the current discussion we're having is fiscal year 21, which really starts this fall. And this assessment would be November, and that's what the commission is considering as it approves these recommendations. That would be the 54%. And then each year after that, we typically update these forecasting models to bring in the most up-to-date assumptions for spending and investments within the community. And then the city commission has a discussion and a vote at where to set that fee on a go-forward basis. And so while I projected and I showed you a projection of 3%, that would be 3% on top of the 54% change this year. But I'd like to emphasize that in each and every year going forward, it's a commission direction of where that fee is set or how it's changed.
Perfect. All right, the next question comes from Edith Vines, and this is going to be for Veronica. Where's the stormwater fee on the current utility bill?
It should be with the list of charges that are shown for the water and sewer. The bill is actually broken down for showing your water consumption and charges for sewer and sanitation. And stormwater is also in that list of line items shown on the breakdown on your bill.
Okay.
Veronica, if I may add one thing, what would be good to emphasize too for this particular one is that for condominiums, you may not see it on your bill because it actually goes to the HOA. And it's dispersed through the unit through that mechanism currently. As part of this change, the stormwater will go directly to the property owner.
Good point. All right, the next question is from Marilyn Mamano. While the system is based on known factors, there will always be special circumstances. Is there an appeals process or a review of the fee? Kyle, I'll let you go ahead and answer this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So as part of the implementation here, we've set up a website and we've set up an email address, which anyone that's concerned about their particular assessment or feels that there's incorrect information should reach out, and we'd be happy to evaluate those circumstances.
Perfect. So the answer to that is yes, we will go ahead and evaluate those circumstances?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. The next, and this is a request from Isaac, please show the slide again of the yearly rate increases.
So as I mentioned a second ago, this is best thought as a projection. So the current year we're talking about is FY21. That shows a 54% increase. The main reason for that is because we're supporting generational capital investments. So over $200 million that I talked about that would be in the form of a bond. Then in the future, what we've done is shown a 10-year projection. If everything were to happen exactly like we've entered it in this model, there are some inflationary increases. And then there's an additional bond that needs to be levied in FY2026. That would be an additional larger increase. None of these future rate increases are set in stone as of this point in time. This is just a projection if everything were to happen exactly as it looks today.
All right. The next one is, I own a townhouse on the North Fork of the New River and is technically utilized as a condominium with monthly condo fees. Am I being charged as a condominium or as a single family home?
We would have to look that. I would assume if it's a land use, it's a condominium land use, it would fall under a condominium.
Yeah. So, and ultimately what you're saying is that would depend on what the land usage is within the property, correct?
Exactly. And so this assessment has been based upon the property assessor's most current role and information relating to each parcel within the city service area.
Okay. The next question is it possible to post the slides or presentation presented on the city website? The condominium categorization seems to focus on eastern high and mid-rise buildings. The assumptions do not reflect reality for western townhouse developments with large footprints and designed permeability in the landscaping and a percentage of open land. Why is there such minimal discretion for the wide range of buildings that are defined as condos?
Mm-hmm. I think the first answer is, Jason, I think we do intend to put the presentation up. We're also recording this and intend to post that up. The fees have been designed with the impervious area and trip generation to as best as they can recognize how different parcels benefit from the stormwater system.
Absolutely. Okay. Rares, are you back on? I believe you just let me know you're back on.
Yeah, can you guys hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you, but there's some feedback there.
Okay, I turned off the phone.
Perfect.
Yeah, in regards to the question, I'm going to try to remember, but I think it was something to the effect, why haven't we spent in the past 30 years, why haven't the funds gone towards the sea level rise protection and so forth? So the answer is we've been installing a lot of tidal valves, we've been raising seawalls, but obviously we need to take the next step and install pump stations that would actually be able to draw down the water from the gravity system that we have now. And these funds would basically help fund these larger sea level rise protection resiliency projects that are much needed throughout the East Coast.
Perfect. Thank you, Rares. And then the one other thing that we want to highlight is that this new fee is not just for aging infrastructure. This is for new infrastructure in neighborhoods that are lacking. Is that correct, Rares?
Yes, of course. Yeah, there's going to be 7 neighborhoods, and we hope to assess many more, at least 7 more. But again, replacing old infrastructure that was put in, 50 years plus ago. Some of them don't have infrastructure. So it's basically refreshing the whole system that needs to be refreshed. So.
Perfect.
And I think Jason, maybe one other thought as well. Any fees paid into stormwater can only be used for stormwater investments or operation and maintenance. So unlike taxes, a stormwater fee has to be dedicated to stormwater activities. I think it's just something clear that was in the front part of that question.
Perfect. Thank you, Kyle.
Jason,
the next question.
Jason, I'm
Yes, ma'am.
sorry. I would like for Rares to also add, with those different infrastructures that we're doing, what are some of those benefits, if you can share a little bit of that? Because he just mentioned briefly about what we're doing, but I want the residents to understand the benefit of those 7 neighborhoods and those different projects that we're going to have.
Yeah, so it depends on the neighborhood itself, but for instance, two of them have no infrastructure whatsoever, right? So when it rains right now, there's a lot of ponding. Even with a very small intensity rain event, there's puddles in the street that persist. So we're basically going to be putting in new infrastructure, reshaping the swales to be able to basically attenuate most of the flooding that's causing. Another 2 or 3 neighborhoods, they have some infrastructure in, but again, it was designed in the 1940s, 1950s. It was mostly corrugated metal pipe. It's really rusty, falling apart. And a lot of, new technologies have emerged since then. And these only have a limited lifespan. The pipe is not going to last in the ground, especially in South Florida where it's mucky and salt water. They have a 30 to 40 year lifespan, so they need to be replaced. So right now they're just like a junky system that's undersized. It's leaking all over the place. It's leaking, water quality issues because there's a lot of debris and oils and stuff going in the North New River. So basically we're going to be ripping these pipes out and putting in brand new pipes, larger capacity pipes, and water quality structures that basically clean the runoff before discharging it. So it's good. You're basically going from an old, horse buggy drawn carriage to a modern, stormwater system. And then there's also some neighborhoods that are tidally influenced, Southeast styles. So there we're going to have to rely on pump stations and basically upgrade the system. There isn't much there, raise seawalls. So those are the 3 main benefits from it.
Excellent. Amisha, is that satisfactory?
That's great. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. The next question was how many participants joined this meeting? Non-city participants, there was a total of 17. Next question is, what or where is the website to file for an appeal or reconsideration of the fee? And I do not believe there is one at this time. Is that correct, Kyle?
Yeah, I don't know what I meant to say with that is if you believe that there's been an error in the calculation of the assessment or the units on the property appraiser, I believe that you could reach out to and say we'd be happy to evaluate it to make sure that the fee has been calculated correctly.
Got it. So what you were saying is that the city is not going to look for special considerations, but that if there was inaccurate information within the property appraiser, that they can go to the property appraiser to correct that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is the key reliance of data that we've used as part of this analysis to identify what land use a property is in, how many dwelling units it has, the size of the gross area, all determined from the property appraiser.
Perfect. Thank you. The next question is, will we also have to pay interest on the bond?
Yeah, so the rate is being sized to pay interest. So what we anticipate is the city is finalizing an issuance that would take place next year. That would include likely a bond that would be in the 30-year repayment time. It would include payments of both principal balance and interest.
The next one is, so the cost projection is that the greater than 50% increase is effectively permanent with a possible additional 50% permanent increase in the next 10 years.
That's correct. So the current outlook would say that the revenues need to be realigned for the underlying cost of the utility, which has been identified, these big cost drivers through the master planning process, in order to ensure that the utility can provide the level of service that it needs to throughout the community. Those revenue increases that are shown there would be the commission can always dictate what level they're setting that at, but these levels are being shown currently today here to repay that bond that would be issued next year. And so I need to be at those levels to make those debt service payments.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, the next question is directed to Veras. The question is, didn't the city draw down $20 million per year and put into general funds? Veras, do you know the answer to that, or possibly Diane?
I am honestly not familiar. I'm not sure if that's true or not. To my knowledge, we've just been operating basically on the stormwater fee that's currently in place right now. And I know it's been raised a couple of times, but to my knowledge, there aren't any project that was $20 million, and I don't think there's been any shifts into general fund from stormwater. We tried to keep them pretty separated, but Laura can speak to that.
No, Hi,
Diane.
this is Diane. No, the $20 million that they're talking about is the ROI, and it doesn't have anything to do with the stormwater fund.
Perfect. Thank you, Diane. The next question, and I'm not sure we'll be able to answer this one, Veras, you'd probably be the best, is how old is the infrastructure for historical Dorsey Riverbend?
So I mean, it varies. To my knowledge, the neighborhood was actually developed after World War II. A lot of veterans went there, so it's a safe bet. Probably like 75+% of the infrastructure in there. It's probably from the 1940s and 50s. You know, then again, there's been some new streets and new developments, so they've been, you know, portions have been more updated, but it's probably, you're looking at 60 years plus. That's why it's very important that needs to be switched out, because a lot of it is operating of little capacity that, you know, maybe less than 25% of what it was intended to do. It's broken, it's corroded, it's collapsed, because it is that old. So.
Perfect. Thank you, Veras. And then, oh, and I do apologize on the question regarding the, which one was it? On the question regarding paying interest on the bond, there was a comment on there regarding the 54% increase plus the built-in 3% seems excessive. So we do want to include that. That was not intentional to leave that off. Outside of that, it looks like those are all of the questions at this time. Any comments that were made that were not questions, please know that those are not going unheard. Those are going to be part of what we store. So it looks like all of those questions have been addressed. We want to thank everyone for participating in this evening's meeting. Please feel free to log on to www.fortlauderdale.gov/stormwater for additional information. And should you think of any additional questions, please feel free to submit them at lauderserve.fortlauderdale.gov using the call center stormwater assessments issue type. In case you joined late, we'll be hosting additional informational meetings on the proposed stormwater assessment. And again, you can find those at www.fortlauderdale.gov/stormwater. You know what, we got one last question, and since we have time, Kyle, I'm going to send this one over to you. Is it possible to put this fee into a vote for the residents? Additionally, in the following years, are we going to be taxed a fee for stormwater and the bond?
So no, typically stormwater fees, utility fees in general, whether it's water, sewer, stormwater, are set by the commission as the governing body. And then the clarification in the future is it's a fee, not a tax, but it will be the commission's decision at what level to set that at on an annual basis.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So with that, I will just remind everyone that www.fortlauderdale.gov/stormwater is where you can find all of the information regarding the upcoming stormwater assessment and the upcoming meetings. Does anybody on the city side have anything else to add? All right, and with that, we will close this out. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.